I'm 17. I've smoked weed, smoked 10x salvia, and tripped twice on an eighth of cubensis before. This is a report of my third trip ever. For several months, most of my good friends frowned upon my newfound fondness for psilocybin mushrooms, but with a little perseverance, I persuaded two of my closest friends and another friend who only recently came to my school. But I immediately bonded with him upon his arrival. Anyways, none of my friends had ever tripped before, and having only tripped twice, I may have slightly underestimated the potency of an eighth of friendly neighbourhood shrooms. I recommended that each of us take an eighth. Not to sound pretentious, but I'm an extremely sound-minded and logical person. On my first trip, I managed to deal with the profoundly mind-bending effects of shrooms to have an amazing trip. I assumed incorrectly that my friends would be capable of this same feat. With a half day left and good weather coming up, my friends and I decided that it would be a good day for our adventure. So we planned to take our shrooms right at 11 o'clock in the parking lot after school, and then make the 10-minute drive to my house and set up my friend's television next to mine so that we could play twice the amount of Skyrim for our trip. Being the stereotypical teenagers that we are, it wasn't until about 1 o'clock that we all managed to arrive at my house. But on the bright side, we picked up another good friend, who planned to just smoke until she had to leave for work later that day. Just before eating our dose, my friend Dave, who had brought the television, realized that he hadn't brought any controllers for his console. He decided that he wasn't going to go through all that work setting up the screen, only to not be able to play his video games. Me and my other friends decided we were too anxious to wait any longer, so we ate our shrooms, and Dave would just have to wait till he got back because we weren't okay with him driving and tripping. He demanded company though, so he took Tony with him. And so it was settled. The shrooms were eaten and it was only a matter of patience now. John and I settled to play some Skyrim while Tyler watched. We chilled for a while. And maybe a half hour to 45 minutes later, John and Tyler decided to go smoke a bowl. I, unfortunately, couldn't, as my only job option at the time appeared to be a place with mandatory drug testing. I stood with them as they smoked out of the sliding glass door in my room. I noticed that the plants outside all had a somewhat surreal look, and there appeared to be spirals of some sort drawn in the smoke clouds from their hits. That was just the first small wave of the impending storm. Surprisingly, though, I soon felt completely normal again. At this point, John decided he needed to pee. He walked out of my room only slightly high from the weed, but then, on the way back, he ran into my room yelling about how there are zits on the walls and how he was being chased by the fucking boogeyman. Laughing hysterically, Tyler and I asked him why he thought he was being chased by the boogeyman. As a side note, I love people's thought processes when they are tripping. John said that he looked at my retainers on the bathroom counter and that they looked like little red monsters. He then claimed that they barked at him, but he had scolded himself for being so naive as to think that a couple of retainers had just barked at him. But then the realization had hit him that if it wasn't the retainers that had barked at him, something clearly had. And what better to suspect than the boogeyman? After having a good laugh, we attempted to play Skyrim, but found it horrendously boring, much to our disappointment, as we had assumed that it would be the best thing ever while tripping. We called Tony to see where he and Dave were, and he answered the phone by shouting, "The bushes are moving!" This provided us with another good laugh, and we were relieved to find out that they were only about 5 minutes away. After what seemed like forever, they arrived, and Dave ate his dose and went to go take a shower. I'm assuming it was almost 2 o'clock at this point. We were all still coming up fast. Tony claimed to feel extremely cold and wrapped himself up in my incredibly comfy bed and blankets. John was babbling nonsensically and laughing on the couch, and Tyler was so stoned that she couldn't stop laughing at us. My body high was getting intense at this point, and even though I was sitting on the bed, I felt as if my arms were pressed up against the bed. Very strange and somewhat concerning. I was slightly surprised to find that Tony was on the brink of tears from not being able to get out of my blanket. It's huge and fluffy. I felt it was my duty to help him. He said that this was all just too much to handle. So I comforted him and asked him if there was anything he needed. He asked for a Dr. Pepper, and I was glad when this cheered him up. He later described drinking the Dr. Pepper as akin to swallowing a little man and having him furiously punch you the whole way down. We all just went back to chilling. I noticed that there was some sort of alien language scrolling Matrix style down my jacket and onto my jeans. I found this extremely exciting and asked my friends to help me decipher it. John replied that he was busy closing his eyes and watching my ceiling lights make cool shapes. But Tony and I spent a good amount of time trying to find meaning in the writing that had suddenly appeared all over my plain white blanket. At this point, Tyler reminded us that it had been our goal to do calculus, so I got my textbook out. Unfortunately, however, it was less than a sentence before I came to some sort of illegible symbol. I asked Tyler what it was, and he replied, "It's a square root symbol, dummy." We concluded that he was clearly lying. Dave was taking forever in the shower, so we decided to go for a short jaunt into my front yard, just for something to do. We all ran out onto my street yelling how hard we were tripping and other statements of a similar stupidity, when we noticed my neighbour had been in the process of getting into his car. However, that was before several teenagers ran by him yelling about the street breathing and the clouds changing colours. We stared at him, sobered momentarily by his expression of pure confusion. He stared back, wide-eyed and open-mouthed, and as shameful as I am to admit it, we then proceeded to leg it back to my house and hide in my basement. Dave still wasn't out of the shower, clearly in there wanking, and for some reason this began to irritate all of us. Some very nasty things were said about Dave and his habit to be incredibly self-centered and irresponsible. Although we can blame it on the shrooms, we all know that they just brought out how we actually felt. Tyler had to leave for work at this point, which was incredibly distressing to the three of us. After one big group hug, he was gone. Feeling utterly lost, we proceeded to sit in my basement until Tony commented that he felt like he was covered in slime, and due to the nature of shrooms, John and I immediately felt the same. I still remember the sensation clearly, and I can tell you it was very, very unpleasant. Just before things took a turn for the worse, our friend Zora randomly showed up and Dave finally got out of the shower. I persuaded him to watch over us in exchange for one very solid and very large hash ball. It was about 3:20, and Zora agreed to drive us down to the beach so we wouldn't be around for my parents coming home from work at 4 o'clock. The car ride to the beach was interesting. At first, the car seemed to be about the same size as my room, and everything outside the car appeared to be fake. But when we pulled up to the beach, the car seemed suddenly to shrink radically and become extremely cramped. We all just sat there quietly listening to Sublime and enjoying ourselves while Zora smoked a little. John's mom sent him a text saying that he needed to call him, and this just about gave me a heart attack. Despite being a first-timer tripping his ass off, John somehow managed to stutter and mumble his way through the conversation without arousing suspicion of his current activities. We were all so happy for him, and decided that it would be a good time to go swing. On our way over to the swings, we saw another bloke with a skateboard who looked close to our age, so not thinking I waved at him and smiled. It took me a second, and a punch from Zora, to realise how bad of an idea it was to invite over a stranger while we were tripping. After a few very awkward attempts at holding a conversation, we all just kind of stood around in silence with the kid. Out of nowhere, the kid suddenly said, "So I'm on some shrooms right now." The next few moments were a blur of happiness and shouts of "us too." Dave and the stranger both talked about how they weren't really feeling anything except lightheaded, and I got part way through telling them that it would kick in later. Dave decided he needed a smoke, and with the first hit of weed, he says that his world literally fragmented into a bunch of colours before reforming, and that he tripped balls suddenly after smoking a little. After chilling and tripping out in the playground for a while, the stranger, still disappointed at his trip, left to go find a nearby party. As he walked away, Tony suddenly looks confused and asked us if we were just talking to that kid. Who knows what time it was at this point, but despite seemingly tripping for hours so far, our adventure was just beginning. We decided it would be fun to all walk down the beach, and at this point, Zora was enjoying being our guide finally, as she could control our trips and find cool things to show us. We walked quite a long way down the beach, and I was getting some amazing visuals. When I looked down, it appeared as if I was walking on top of a multicoloured cloud. The ocean looked fake, and like it was wrapped in saran wrap. In my previous trips, the trees moved and appeared as if they were a very vivid painting, but this time there were layers of non-reality in between the trees, in which an endless void filled with strange zodiac symbols called to me. We finally made it to our destination, which previously had been known only to Zora. It was this easily climbable bluff to a flat forest area, and another steeper climb up and around to get to the top of a cliff from there. But this area was special. This was where all of us had spent our childhood, and the sudden surge of memories it brought back was almost unbearably pleasurable. I won't go into too much detail, but we spent hours there playing on the bluff and knocking huge pieces of clay down off of the massive cliff. Words don't do justice to the happiness I felt the whole time at the cliff. All of us just threw away all our cares in the world and played like little kids. It was a truly amazing experience, and it brought all of us together as inseparable friends. We sat and talked as both us and the sun came down, and realized that the silly reputations we all work so hard to maintain at school and in society are idiotic, and that we had just spent the whole day being ourselves and just running wild, and it had been probably the best day of all of our lives. Since this trip, we have all decided to just be ourselves, and everyone who disapproves can just fuck off. My life has improved drastically, and I now feel that I am more honest with myself and everyone around me. We walked back in mostly silence, as we all just needed time to absorb everything we had taught each other and ourselves that day. By the time we came back to the car, we all felt totally down, but were surprised when as soon as Zora started driving, we all started tripping again. It was dark by now and we were listening to dubstep, and I thought we were in a spaceship, and John thought we were in a caterpillar. We decided it may be a good idea to go get gas so we could come down a little further before I had to face my parents. So we drove into Coupeville. Right as we were about to drive away, this black guy in a very expensive-looking BMW rolls up next to us and puts down his window. We roll ours down too, but are all looking at each other thinking, what the fuck? So anyways, the dude rolls up rapping and then stops and says, I just thought of a quote which I'm going to share with you all. Don't drive for the other guy. You know how they tell you in driver's ed to drive defensively? To drive for the other guy? Nah, fuck that. You drive for yourself. It shouldn't have to be your responsibility to drive for that guy who just got dumped, got hammered, and is speeding down the road in your lane. I was driving down Madrona just now, and I could see all the souls of all the people who have died from driving drunk in the trees. You kids just stick with a little greenery for your scenery, and you ain't going to end up like them. You look at the obituaries, and you never see any man who smoked 100 blunts and went and crashed his car or beat his wife. You stick to that greenery and you'll be good. But you start mixing that other shit in there and you're going to get busted. That guy at your school, that new coach, that fucker got busted, man. He got busted. Don't end up like him. We still haven't figured out what he was referring to. I'm kind of wary of the new coach now, though. It's the law of avoidance, man. 9 out of 10 times you be good, but that one time and you're going to get fucked up. That's why you got to just stick with that greenery for that scenery. I mean, look at me. I'm like 45 and I still get pussy. I'm sure you kids know how it is. You don't just have one girl. You got a girl that's a friend. You got a girl that's a friend. You got a girl that's a friend. I mean, why have the heifer when you could have the whole herd? Then he rapped some more, and we all attempted to deal with the mind fucking he had just put us through. Finally, he said, you all been blessed, and now you ain't never gonna have to worry about ending up like those other poor souls. And then he drove off. Now keep in mind John, Dave, Tony and I were all on shrooms. And Zora was high as heaven when this occurred. This would have been insane when we were sober. This black philosopher had just blown our minds and then blessed us. We sat in shock for like 5 minutes at the gas pump. After the most unforgettable and life-changing day of my life, we finally went back to my house and just stayed up the rest of the night talking about life, the universe, and beyond. I thank mushrooms for allowing us to all open our minds and come closer to each other. And I know that even on my deathbed I will happily remember this day. I hope to trip again soon. Thank you for bearing with me. I know this was long, but I feel as if it's all necessary.